Well, hello, everybody. This is Roger Durling, the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and we're here to talk about the incredible new film, Wolfwalkers. And I have the directors, Tomm Moore and Russ Stewart. But before we start the conversation, I just want to quickly read a quote from the Hollywood Reporter review that says that Wolfwalkers is a visually dazzling, richly imaginative, emotionally resonant production that taps into contemporary and traditions while being true to its distant origins. Welcome, Tomm, Russ Stewart. Russ Stewart, I love this film. I was so emotionally blown away by it. I want to start by talking about how did you arrive to the themes of this movie, which are quite profound. The idea of the wilderness and contrast with repression and the sort of Puritan world and versus instincts.
Ooh, well, they were all themes. Yeah, sorry, Ross.
Yeah,
they're
themes that Tomm and myself are both very passionate about, and have been. I think there's more and more people that are getting passionate about environmental themes as we see, more and more environmental destruction and climate change affecting everyone across the planet. But I think, 7 years ago, Tomm and myself knew that we wanted to write a story and direct a film that we would be passionate about even 7 years later, not something that was too trivial that we might get bored with. So we knew we had to tap into themes that we cared a lot about. So we both are interested in animal rights and concerned about polarization of society and so many of the themes that Wolfwalkers explore. So we just sat down 7 years ago and came up with a story.
That's the trick. I think being a filmmaker, especially in animation where it takes so long, it's like some sort of ongoing therapy where you're working through all the themes and stuff that you care about. And the main trick is to bury those in a story that's entertaining enough that people are carried along without feeling lectured to or something like that.
And also, but what's amazing about your film is how deeply profound the film is, but then it is a family film. I mean, it's highly entertaining. Was that difficult to find a balance with the profundity of the themes and keeping it a family entertainment as well?
We were lucky with this one because the very first idea had a pretty decent hook to it, like the idea of the father hunting his own child, or that the child would become the thing that the father's hunting. And some of those things were they made it seem. I remember we were working on Song of the Sea at the time, and Ross and I were working in the same room as Adrian, the art director of Song of the Sea, and we told him our idea. He was like, "Oh, that sounds like a movie that's made and you're just telling me about it. That doesn't sound like a movie that hasn't been figured out yet." So it sounded good, but then then the development and writing process was more complicated than you would have thought. But I think we had a pretty good, I think conflict and drama are so important, to capture an audience and to carry them along so they don't feel like that you're just kind of wandering through different themes. And there's good conflict built into the concept, I think,
It was a little bit tricky at times to not go straight into the darker elements, because we deal with a part of Irish history where there's a lot of dark stories there, and because we're dealing with like an extinction of species and repression of society and the fact that Maeve's mother is in peril a lot of the time, we had to toe that line, of, as you say, being family friendly, not scaring kids, and then also not making it too sugar coated, because it was an actual actual historical time period. So yeah, there was a few times that we had to pull back from the darkness. Yeah.
There was one thing that I find deeply emotional. What we've been undergoing here in the United States. There's been quite a lot of division within parties and political parties, and there is a wonderful message in your film about understanding your enemy, and that once you get to know your enemy, there is no differences, and that is quite a beautiful message that you convey.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who, go ahead, Ross, sorry.
No, you go, Tom.
I was just talking to a friend of mine who worked with us on previous projects, and he lives in Wyoming, and we were talking about that feeling in America at the moment. I mean, we don't live there, so we only see it from afar, and it sounded a lot like Northern Ireland. Like, I grew up part of my life, the summers and stuff, in Northern Ireland. I moved down when I was quite young, but I was born up there, and I had that same thing where people that had a lot more in common than difference, they were neighbors, would be so isolated by retreating into ideologies and identities that kept them apart. And it was only the kids that you could see that could really cross those boundaries, or young people, and that's kind of what we hope to show, that like, even though Robin is a little girl from England and they're the colonizing force, and Maeve is like the oldest of the Irish inhabitants that are being threatened by these colonists, that the little child of a colonist and like the pagan indigenous Irish girl could be friends, because after all, they're both kids and they have more in common than they have differences. So that's the kind of hope, I think, in all the division, is that kids don't usually see the differences that adults get lost in,
And that polarization in society that you're talking about, it's not just in the States. I think it's happening worldwide. And like in certain European countries, the scapegoat is immigrants. In other countries, it's people of a different religion or from a different ethnic background or anything. But I think a lot of the times it's easier for these sections of society to be hated because people don't actually know anyone in there. And once you get to know someone from that community or from that part of society, you realize they're just humans, just like you, and you can be friends with them. And social media allows this huge, big collective kind of hatred of the other, in that, like, it kind of allows people to like fuel their hatred or fuel their anger without actually ever talking to people on the other side. So as Tom was saying, like, hopefully dealing with these themes, addressing the fact that your enemy can be your friend if you just get to know them, hopefully it might awaken a few more minds.
The mad thing was, I remember visiting my family in Canada, and they were friends with other Irish immigrants in Toronto, and they were also Northern Irish families. And in Northern Ireland, they would never have known each other because they were Protestant and Catholic and opposite sided the tracks. But in Canada, in Toronto, as new immigrants in the 1990s, they had more in common with each other as both being from Northern Ireland and both being foreigners in a new country. And I think that's kind of what Maeve and Robin have. Those characters are kind of both outsiders. Robin's a new immigrant, and Maeve has been left behind. She's not part of the everyday society in Ireland. And so those two characters have more in common by being outsiders, despite the fact that they're officially on opposite warring tribes,
There is so much of the folklore of Ireland, and there is a historical aspect to it. How, can you talk about that aspect of it? I mean, one of the things that I was impressed about it is that you hint to the idea of Thomas Cromwell and some history, but you do find a balance where you deal with it, but not,
Our guy is Thomas's nephew, Oliver Cromwell. Thomas was a generation before, but Oliver Cromwell was the guy who really destroyed Ireland. He was the Lord Protector after the English Civil War. And Ross and I kind of got really into that. We did a lot of research around it that we ultimately kind of left aside, because it's sort of like, that's the richness, that's the background, that's the backdrop to this story, but we had to just keep coming back to the kids, to the girls' story, really.
Yeah, like, I think as we say often, we went on a shopping trip through Irish history and folklore, and we just picked the parts that suited the story best. I mean, if we were to make a film about Lord Protector, there's so much other material there that could mine, and sometimes when we were researching the history, there was fantastic story points, but for a different film, not for the story of Robin and Maeve. And you kind of have to go, well, it's a pity we can't use that, but we'll leave that aside. But yeah, it's a fascinating part of Irish history, and yeah, many more stories could be told of that, but ultimately we had to keep on coming back to Robin and Maeve's story.
Yeah, but Russ, you always, it was about the girls, you know, from the get-go. You because I mean there is the conflict of Bill and the Lord Protector, which kind of mirrors their conflict as well. But from the get-go is always going to be the two girls.
Yeah, I mean that's where the heart of the story is, really, you know. And I think everyone falls in love with Maeve because she's such a little rough and tumble, unique little fireball character. So I think at a certain point, even when we started straying into Bill's story and Lord Protector's story and all of these interesting other characters, side characters, even Sean Oak's story, we had to go, okay, well, I mean, that's fun, but we have to come back to the two girls because that's ultimately what the story is all about. So yeah, maybe there'll be a film of just Sean Oak or a film of just Bill.
So we've talked about all the themes, and then we go into the visual style. And one of the remarkable things about your film is that the visual style carries on the themes. You know, can you talk about? I could watch this film on end. I love all the geometry of the town and the structure that not mimics, but alludes to all the themes we've talked about. And then by the time we get to the forest, you know, there is this sort of fluidity and a contrast between the two visual style. Can you talk about that development?
Well, the visuals kind of went in tandem with the story, really, from the very start. When Tomm himself came up with the initial synopsis for the story, we both had an idea of what kind of worlds you know, we'd be exploring. Tomm himself are very visually minded, so I think as soon as we start talking about ideas, we start, like, you know, coming up with images and jotting them down. So we knew that we had to have two contrasting worlds, one of wildness and nature and instinct and like the world of the Wolfwalkers that would be fluid and free and, you know, very loose and sketchy and watercolory. And then in contrast to that, we would have the town of the Lord Protector with all its rules and oppression and very much like geometrical, as you were saying, like patterny, almost like a maze, very structured and ordered, and ultimately very much like a cage. Because Robin has to escape from this town, you know. So everything that we did visually, we had to kind of put on one side or the other side of the fence, you know, either make it the land of, or the world of the freedom, or else the world of caged kind of structure and order.
But one of the things that I notice is that once Robin it starts making into that world, there is this gradual changing of the lines, you know, things starts loosening it up, and by the end, you know, there is this circular, you know, I cannot think of the word, but there's a circular world to her. You know, can you tell us about calibrating, delineating that, and was that difficult to draw her and make that gradual change?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching a lot of short movies at the moment because I'm looking at them for the Academy for the short film Oscar, and I think it's the kind of thing that you see experimented with in short films more. I always love short films because they're so expressive and experimental, and they can try different things. For a feature, it can be harder. Like, these are ideas that Ross and I would have talked about back on Secret of Kells when Ross was art director, but was hard to put into a pipeline where you've got a lot of artists that all have to draw the same. And even the idea of drawing the characters rougher or more loose and flowy, that's a kind of vague thing. One artist's idea of loose and flowy might be another artist's the tightest drawing that they could do, and back and so forth. So we did have to kind of develop a style with the final line artists that were making the final line that would appear on screen, that had a kind of a consciousness of, okay, let's make the lines nervous now, let's make them loose now, let's make them wild now. And Robin, there was a lot of discussions about, okay, what's her mindset at the moment? Like, is she in town style? So when she's in town style, we draw her with the really clean lines. Oh, now she's closer to Maeve, and then we draw her rough. And that was kind of fun. It was kind of an extra challenge because an awful lot of the time, the animation the part of the animation department that do the final line are often seen as kind of assistants or just have to follow things like technicians. But we were asking them to be more like artistic and to think like maybe comic book inkers or something. Think about what was going on for the character when they were drawing them, not just follow the lines perfectly. So yeah, it was kind of nice. I think it was more creative than you usually have in a big production, which was nice.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the sequence of when she starts coming into terms with her instincts, and how did you arrive to visualizing, you know, the sense of smell and I think it's called Running with the Wolves, right? You know, where her instincts are awakened.
That's
It's quite
important.
Yeah, I think in the script it was just a couple of lines. It was it just said like Robin explores the world through being a wolf, and so we had to expand on that. You know, at storyboard levels, we worked with great storyboarder Guillaume Laurent, who's a director himself, and he came up with all kinds of really beautiful imagery for what Robin might do as a wolf, and then we had to, like, you know, edit it and cut it down, and then Tomm went jogging one day and heard the Aurora track Running with the Wolves on a shuffle playlist, and came back in all excited going, I found the perfect song for this sequence. And so it just built up from there, and eventually we kind of realized that it became the high point, like the visual high point, but also Robin's climax, kind of like thematic climax for the movie, where she suddenly experiences this amazing freedom and this world that she's never experienced before. And we kind of knew that it had to be a little bit of a roller coaster, you know, some kind of experience that she could never go back to her normal normal world after experiencing that, you know, like something that would utterly change her viewpoint and change her world experience. So yeah, it started off really small in the script and just went on a complete evolution into almost like a beautiful little music video in itself.
No, it's a very emotional, very, very extremely visceral moment. It's probably one of my favorite moments in cinema this year.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments that you changed the ratio of the film. You know, can you elaborate on those choices?
Yeah, that goes back again to like Ross and I loving comic books and illustration and kind of thinking, you know, we have a camera or an imaginary camera, but we also have a kind of a page. You know, we can think about the screen as a page that we want to change the dimensions of. So in a comic book, you would just naturally make the panels smaller and smaller to make the character feel confined. So the cinematic equivalent of that is aspect ratio. So we kind of just kept on pushing the sides in to make the girls feel confined at a moment, especially Robin when she felt confined. And then other times when we wanted a big dramatic sweep, you know, we would add this is something we've been playing with in a lot of our productions. You would add kind of fake widescreen bars so that we kind of had just a strip in the middle of the screen where we kind of had a Western showdown moment when Bill and the Bill Wolf and Lord Protector are facing off against each other. It's just playing with the screen, you know.
Yeah, and playing around with like all kinds of visual language. I mean, I've read a lot of people would have said that Wolfwalkers reminds them of a kid's storybook or you know, an illustrated storybook, and I think that's because we do treat you know, like our animated movies very much like illustrations. You know, we're all kinds of a big collection of artists in the studio, and I think a lot of people are used to working on a page, used to working in print or in painting or in illustration or in comics, and so there's a whole visual language that can be employed in those mediums, and I think we just try and transfer it across into animation as much as possible, so we can use all of the visual language tools and tricks that we can in other mediums. You know?
And speaking of visual language, I wouldn't know how to describe the technical aspect of it, but there are moments where that we're able to see the background through the characters.
Oh yeah.
Could you I mean, it's beautiful, and I can't describe it why it's so beautiful, but
it's kind of like seeing the, you know, if you look at a watercolor or print. Like the two styles we were looking at were like watercolor sketch paintings for the forest and like woodblock prints or screen prints. And what's nice about both those techniques is you can often see evidence of how they were made. They can, like a screen print can be slightly offset, and so the lines might be here and the colors might be over here. Or watercolor, the watercolors might bleed out beyond the lines, or you might see the pencil sketch that you put down first and then build the watercolors on top. So everything is kind of iterative, and you see the layers of work that went in to create the image, and we just tried to keep that right through. And sometimes that was trickery, like sometimes that was kind of fake, like it actually would have been easier to make it perfect, but we had to kind of push the team to make it more loose looking, you know what I mean? Make it more, yeah.
That's beautiful. You mentioned a little bit about Aurora. You know, you've worked before with Bruno Coulet in Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. Can you tell us about the evolution of working with him in the music, and then the usage of Aurora?
Yeah, I mean, all of those pieces kind of came together over the course of the production. It was kind of natural to keep working with Bruno and Keela after the previous projects because they'd worked so well, and it just felt like this movie in so many ways was a continuation of the previous projects. So that felt natural. And then they've kind of changed the way they've worked over the years, and I think a growing respect and trust has let it be that Bruno will just leave certain sections for Keela to bring what they do to it. So there's areas that are full score. Bruno writes the music, records the orchestra, and then Keela add instrumentation on top. And then there's areas that Keela just take it from start to finish almost, you know. And so that's nice. And there's a nice trade-off, and there's almost like the orchestra part where you're recording very kind of organized, and then there's slightly more chaotic wild part that Keela bring where they jam, and you know, that's really nice. And then Aurora just kind of fitted in really lovely because we had the song in mind, but she was open to kind of adapting it and working with the musicians. And so Bruno did a version of the song with the orchestra, and then Keela came in and brought in a lot of percussion and kind of reimagined the song with the kind of instruments we were using in the soundtrack rather than the kind of more electronic sound that the original had. So yeah, it all kind of came together really nicely. I mean, Ross is much more of a musician than me. For me, that part of it is always just like magic, because I couldn't do it myself even if I tried. So I just enjoy working with the musicians as they do it, you know.
It is amazing, like seeing Bruno, you know, just have an entire composition in his mind, and like at one stage over with the orchestra we recorded in Sofia in Bulgaria, and he went off for an hour and he was just working away on a little table where there was snacks and stuff. And then he came back after and he goes like, I've written the score for Aurora's song. We're like, oh, is that what you were doing over there? It's just all in his mind. It's a really amazing talent, and it's beautiful to watch. And he has all the strings and all of the horns and all of the flute section and everything just all working together in his mind like that. I don't know how he does it. It's magic.
I don't recall watching an animated film where I was so in tune with the voices. And I'm talking about the character actors. You know, can you tell us about that aspect of, you know, casting the voices? How early do you cast the actors, and how are they involved in the process?
Yeah, it's really
well
early, yeah.
I think, yeah, like I mean, Tom himself would have had a couple of actors in mind when we were designing the characters. Like Sean Bean, I think we really wanted for Bill as soon as we started drawing Bill at the start, and luckily enough, Sean agreed to do it. But with the child actors for the voices of Robin and Maeve, that's a little bit more of a gamble. We had to go through a casting agency to try and find, like, you know, children from drama groups or amateur dramatic societies, as well as, like, you know, the ones represented by professional agencies. And Robin, because she had to be an English girl, we had to look in England, and then Maeve, being an Irish girl, we had to look out in the countryside in Ireland, you know, like, and Louise Keeley did a great job as casting director in finding these girls from all across the two islands. And I think it was just a matter of looking through many different casting audition tapes. But I think as soon as we saw Eva Whittaker, who plays Maeve, and Honor Nisi, who plays Robin, I think as soon as we saw those videos, I think they just like ticked all the boxes. They even kind of looked the part. Like Honor had that kind of demeanor of looking like Robin, even the way that we would have drawn her, and then Eva had this huge energy, was almost like jumping off the screen when she was doing her audition. So she had Maeve's energy just there and then on the spot. So we were really lucky to find them.
So that I understand, the process already was done. I mean, the drawing was done, and
no, you would but we would have a script and a storyboard for. I think we would have the whole movie storyboarded and cut to the animatic with rough voices, where we would use just people in the studio would do the voices for us. And then we'd sort of have an overall idea for the movie, but we hadn't animated anything, and it was very early. And then once we have the voices recorded, then the animators can be really inspired by the actors too. So oftentimes when an animator is animating the character, they'd have the video of the voice actor doing the recording on the screen while they're working to kind of compare and to bring some of their ideas into the animation. So it's very early that you record the voices in the overall process. And that's why it's so kind of strange with animation. It's happened to me on all the projects now. Just before Christmas, I met Eva Whittaker, who plays Maeve. We had to get some photos taken for a newspaper. And, you know, like when we met her, she was like 8 years old, but, you know, just a couple of years later, she's taller and grown up. And it's just crazy how you meet them really early on, just a certain point, and then by the time the movie's finished, they're all grown up. It takes so long.
I'm a big fan of Simon McBurney. I got to see him do this theatrical piece called The Encounter, and his usage of the voice is
and the kind of surround sound and all. Yeah, I have a friend who told me that he had that experience. He had that experience in Peru that he was trying to recreate for the audience.
Correct. Yeah, in the rainforest, and then the whole show is about listening to voices, and I kept thinking about that when I was watching him do, you know, the Lord, his usage of sound is so powerful.
He had to be very kind of toned down though, because we were trying to play the character quite straight, like not too villainous, not too characterful, like just like someone who just wanted, you know, he's kind of uptight and he just wanted the orders followed. So that was like, Simon was great. He was really enthusiastic and everything, and brought a lot to the character, because he's not the most appealing character for an actor to play. You know?
No.
Nobody wants to be the mean baddie. Well, maybe it's fun to be the mean baddie. Actually, maybe actors would enjoy it. I don't know.
But he was such a professional though as well. Like when he came over for the voice record, he sat us down like for an hour, and he had already in mind the kind of character that he wanted to play Lord Protector as, you know. So he kind of gave us a kind of a pitch of how he imagined Lord Protector, and saw and wanted to see if we agreed with it. But yeah, we trusted him completely that he would bring this kind of like very authoritarian undertoned menace to the role, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's an accomplished director himself, so I'm pretty sure he had a pretty set ideas of how he wanted to do things. So my next question is about, you know, COVID and the fact that you hadn't finished the film, you know, before COVID hit, and you know, how did this affect the process of finishing the film?
Nearly finished, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
we
went into lockdown in March in Ireland, and we finished the film at the end of June. So we only had a couple of months with full lockdown here, and most of it was compositing and then sound design and color grading. There was a little bit of effects animation and some cleanup animation in our sister studios in Paris and in Luxembourg as well. But yeah, it luckily enough, I think in 2D animation, a lot of people can work from their bedroom or their sitting room without too much disruption. You know, like it's it's nothing like, say, that the stop motion animation studios have to go through, where they're in total lockdown because they need people in the studio. I think a lot of our workers can work remotely, and it doesn't change too much. But yeah, for sound design and color grading, we had to go over to Paris, so everyone had to be all masked up and covered in hand sanitizer and everything. But yeah, it didn't slow us down too much, and we were lucky enough that we recorded the music just, I think, 2 weeks before lockdown came in, and that was our last big gathering of all kinds of creatives in the one room. So if lockdown had happened like a little bit earlier, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So we really got away with it.
Yeah. And I skipped a question that I wanted to ask, and it's about, it's explaining to the audience that the process, this was hand drawn. This wasn't done through computer, graphics. Can you tell us about the importance of making this film hand drawn?
Yeah, it's supposed to be like, we wanted it to be a real celebration of hand-drawn animation. And I mean, we use computers a lot, but what we wanted to do was to have it that we start everything with hand-drawn, and that what's on screen at the end, all the computers should do is help us show that it has been hand-drawn. Like, our biggest retake was, don't make it too digital. And at every stage we wanted to see the artist's work come true, because I think there is something expressive and timeless about hand-drawn animation. And I mean, just earlier today, I was watching some older hand-drawn animation, and it is true that something like Bambi or My Neighbor Totoro, they don't age in the same way that computer animated films do. They have a kind of timelessness, and you can have a language with hand-drawn, like we talked about earlier. Hand-drawn animation has its own language, and there's something about it that it can say things that you can't say with CG, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well,
we're
yeah,
lucky enough at the end of production, then we have these beautiful artifacts left over, like, beautiful paintings, watercolor paintings, and gorgeous, like, all the backgrounds were done on paper, like with brushes or ink as well. So we have an exhibition in Kilkenny here in the local gallery of all the original artworks up on the wall. I think it's there for the next 2 or 3 months, and it's beautiful for not just all the artists and the crew who worked on the film, but just the people in Kilkenny can walk along and see all of the behind the scenes artwork.
And maybe a nice thing about COVID is they've done quite a good virtual walkthrough. So even if you're in Santa Barbara, you can go online and have a virtual walk through the gallery in Kilkenny.
And what website can we go through?
Butler Gallery, the Butler Gallery.
Butler Gallery. Well, I definitely
Butler Gallery.
Yeah, I'll definitely want to check that out. And so, I mean, the reception here in the United States, you've read the reviews, and everybody's seen it on Apple TV. What way has the people in Ireland that have seen the film, what has been the reaction like?
It's been great.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, we were #1 in the box office in Ireland for, I think, a couple of weeks. But ironically, it's during lockdown, when there's only, I think, 50 people allowed in a cinema at the time. So while we were #1, still box office.
I went on the last day before the cinemas closed again there after Christmas. I went, or just before Christmas, I went. And at the start, I thought I'd have the screen to myself, but slowly families came in. And I think with the social distancing, it was the equivalent of a full house. You know what I mean? It was like 4 or 5 families, or the maximum that could come in. So it's pretty good. But I mean, just the feedback has been lovely. And even here in Kilkenny, we've had such support, because the movie's set in Kilkenny, and our studio has been here in Kilkenny for 20 years now. And the town kind of embraced it. And October was Wolfwalkers month, and there's still like murals that were painted in the town, in the back streets of the characters, and we had projections on the castle, and it was kind of nice. It was a bit of a hometown kind of victory, which was nice.
And there was one thing that I skipped talking about, that the color. Color is such an emotional aspect of cinema, and can you talk a little bit about how you use the color? I mean, I noticed the reds, and I noticed, of course, once you get in the forest, you have a lot of the oranges and the greens, etc. Can you talk about the emotional journey through the colors?
Well, I mean, we're lucky enough to work with some amazing artists in Cartoon Saloon, you know, from all across Europe and further afield in Brazil and Americas and Asia. And so we, like a lot of our concept artists and scene illustration crew are amazing painters and illustrators themselves. And so we got nearly everyone to give their own interpretation of different environments, and we got like some color script work done where colors would be plotted throughout the entire film. But we knew that, of course, like the town had to be very desaturated and quite like muted and grays, just because the Lord Protector has sucked all the color and all the fun out of Kilkenny. And then in contrast to that, you know, the forest, especially at autumn time, is going to have these beautiful oranges and reds of autumnal color, which match perfectly Maeve and Moll's, you know, hair. And we knew that orange was going to be the dominant Wolfwalker, you know, color, even the scents and everything. So we had these key moments, these benchmark colors to work towards. One of the kind of funny, ironic things in working with this color palette is that we have the Irish flag very well represented in the film, green, white, and gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Tom can show you in the poster.
Is it if it goes gold or orange, white, and green? That's another country, isn't it? I don't know the country that is. There's a country that has the Irish flag the other way around. But anyway, the Irish flag is symbolic of peace between the Republicans and the the Protestants, you know. And so it's kind of the theme of the movie as well.
Yeah.
It's really, really wonderful. And then my last question is, how does it work when you have two very strong artistic minds working? How do you divvy up the directing and working together?
I'll show you the scars and the bruises from Ross beating me up. We hate each other now. We only do these interviews, and the rest of the time we never speak.
We had a soundproof room where we used to go in and fight it out. So the rest of the crew
smash plates. Remember, was that in Faulty Towers? He had a room that you would smash plates in. But I know we know each other a long time. We've been like friends since we were kids, and like we went to college together, and we worked on a lot of projects together before. So I think right from the beginning, whenever Ross and I decided to co-direct together, we kind of knew we had very similar sensibilities, particularly on the visuals, and also on the themes that we wanted to get across. So I think we were well matched that way. And most of the time, there was times when we divvied it up, but only when things were really busy, whenever I would focus more on animation and characters and Ross would focus more on backgrounds, because that's our kind of initial speciality. But to be fair, on most things, we just sort of divided it, and we kind of relied on each other's second opinion a lot if it was our speciality.
And one of the handy things too is that if one of us had to be out for a week or two, we knew that the other one would you know, like direct in the same way. You weren't going to come in after your holiday and
what did you do?
Well, you know, congratulations, Guy. I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. I was so emotionally involved with this story. I cried, and it's profound. It made me think about a lot of things. And although it's very specific about Irish history, you know, we mentioned it resonates, especially today with our country. You know, it's very hopeful, extremely hopeful, that if we all get to know each other a little better, we wouldn't be fighting so much.
Yeah, it's the openness to rediscover each other with that kind of childlike open heart that we kind of need to reconnect with, you know, rather than retreating further and further into our little silos, which is tough, you know.
Yeah,
especially in times of COVID. Tear
down more walls. Instead of building more walls, we should be tearing down the walls.
Well, you guys are definitely helping inspire us. I am going to visit you in Kilkenny.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
And
I have to say, I like your style, man. Man after my own heart. We have very similar style. I need a pair of glasses like yours.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to have a pint and
that would be good. Yeah, and maybe a redbreast whiskey or
there we go. Now we're talking. Thank you, guys, and congratulations, everybody. Please spread the word. The film is Wolfwalkers, and it's just one of the best films. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day.